Hello IHH patrons, and welcome to the first ever episode of Lit Happened Here, in which I attempt to talk vaguely intelligently about books related to true crime just for my wonderful patron crowd. If I sound different to you, I am recording in the dining room of my mum's house in a village in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. I've got my laptop and my same microphone and everything here, so hopefully it won't sound terribly different, but if it does, just know I'm not trying new things as much as trying to do the standard things from a new location. The topic of today's episode, our first ever Lit Happened Here, is the book Blood on Her Hands by Tanya Farber. I think there's quite a lot of overlap between my patrons and the listeners/patrons of True Crime South Africa. So if you're one of those people, you will no doubt have heard of this book, Blood on Her Hands, and the name of the author, Tanya Farber, who's also a journalist. You will have heard that from myself and from Nicole of True Crime South Africa. It's one of the better resources available to those of us who care about local true crime. And I've used it here for the research on episodes before, and it'll have appeared in my show notes before. I think it is a great starting point for what I want to do with Lit Happened Here. As I mentioned when I first talked about this little fun segment that I wanted to add, I will be covering fiction as well as non-fiction, and actually, to a small degree, Tanya Farber's book, Blood on Her Hands, does that. But, as usual, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to start with the blurb from the publisher. I'm just going to read it to you verbatim, and then I will unpack more of it. So, this is a quote. In Blood on Her Hands, award-winning journalist Tanya Farber investigates the lives, minds, and motivations of some of South Africa's most notorious female murderers, from the poisonous nurse Daisy DeMelka to the privileged but deeply disturbed Najwa Peterson, to the mysterious Joey Haroff, who died before revealing where the bodies of her victims, including her own niece, were. Farber sets each case against the backdrop of the different eras and regions of the 20th and early 21st century South Africa the woman operated in. Her writing style is lighter than the subject matter might suggest, and Blood on Her Hands will keep you reading until late at night, probably with your light on. The women featured also include Dina Rodriguez, Phoenix Racing Cloud Tehran, Marlene Lenberg, Shanae van Heerden, and Qelewe Mbokazi. End quote. So that's the blurb, and it does an accurate job of describing what you're going to get, but I don't know that it does justice to what Tanya's actually done, so I want to unpack that a little bit. Chapter by chapter, Tanya has taken the story of a specific woman killer in South Africa, and she's started off each chapter with a very, personal and insightful imagined scenario. So here she's kind of blurring the lines between narrative fiction and non-fiction and true crime. So, for example, with Joey Haroff, we start off with Tanya placing her, getting ready for the day and looking at her photographs, and these details of how she puts on her makeup or what her framed photographs in her house look like, this is based on historical fact. We've got those photos, we know what was in her house, we know what she looked like. It reminds me a little bit of the disclaimer that they have in some of the Wondery podcasts that are based on historical research. I can't remember the exact phrasing, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but they say, in most cases we can't know exactly what was said, but all of our recreations are based on research. I think that's how they phrase it. Anyway, I think that's a really good comparison to what Tanya has done here. She's really put in the work. The research is there. She's not pulling this out of nowhere. What she does have is an incredible eye for detail and building a story around that detail. Tanya has ascribed a kind of narrative to it, which allows you to I want to say empathize. It's not sympathy. You're not trying to cast this person that you know is going to go on to commit this horrific crime, or in some cases already has committed horrific crimes. But it allows you to identify with the woman at the heart of the story. Even if you are reading those intros and going, well, that's not the decision I would have made. That's not how I would have interpreted that slight, or I wouldn't have reacted out of jealousy in this way. The point is that you are then immediately hooked into this identification and inclusion process of grappling with the person who is the bad guy, the perpetrator, the murderer. This is the person who is, there's no doubt here, has done bad things, has taken life. And because of this strategic way that Tanya opens each chapter, she invites you to compare yourself with that person. And some of those comparisons are going to, put you quite apart from the murderer. But a lot of them are not. They're going to be situations that you might at least recognize, even if you would have done totally different things in those scenarios. So this little trick is really the magic, I think, of Tanya's approach to telling these stories. With the cases that she covers, most of them you will be quite familiar with as a true crime person. Maybe not. Even for me, there were a couple that I only had the barest understanding of, and then there were cases that I knew backwards and forwards. But by avoiding a straightforward telling of this happened, then this happened, then we ended up here, and opening with this sort of personal scene setting, Tanya invites you into each story in a very strategic way. I can't think of a better way to say it. Each chapter is fully contained in the sense that if you're reading the chapter on Dina Rodriguez, you're going to get the full story and finish that chapter and start the next one on someone completely different. And that's quite nice. And I think for anyone who is struggling to read, to concentrate and to get through books, as I admitted when I first told you about starting this segment, that was something that I was really struggling with. The chapter design of little enclosed standalone stories is nice. It means that you can sort of lie down in bed and say, okay, tonight I'm going to read one chapter, and know that you're going to get the full story in much the way that your average podcast episode would do for you. And then right at the end of the book, once she's told you all of these stories, Tanya then swaps back into a kind of high-level narration reporter role where she's looked at statistics and psychological materials such as the DSM, and is able to sort of contextualize some of the actions that the killers in her book may have did take, what drove those, what might have been contributing to them on a psychological scale. When I first read that through, I had a brief moment of wishing that the contextualization, the statistics, the diagnoses, all of that information, I wish that it was in closer proximity to the crime story. And that's because I wanted to sort of understand, again, if we go with the example of Dina Rodriguez, not just what she did, but what kind of pattern she was fulfilling, what kind of profile of killer she might have fit under. And that was just an impulse when I first read the book. And then I took a step back and thought, how would Tanya have been able to do this any differently? How would she have been able to close that gap between telling the story of what perpetrator X did and explaining what psychological and statistical information might apply to that same perpetrator? But actually, in hindsight, having checked that impulse and thought about it, I do think that the format, the structure that she's taken is really probably the best way to handle it, or the only sensible way to handle it, because you need to take that step back from the personal that she has introduced into the analytical that then comes later. The long and the short of it is that I really do think Blood on Her Hands is a fantastic book. I would recommend it to true crime fans, both here in South Africa and abroad. I have found, 3 sources, 3 links for you. These are not affiliate links, just to be utterly clear. I do not get anything if you buy these. I'm just sharing this because I did the Googling anyway, and you may as well benefit from my Googling. So yes, I've got an exclusive books.co.za link for you. You can get the paperback from them for about $250 or $260, or you can get it from Amazon for around $9 in the Kindle format. That's the version that I have. And when I went to Takealot, at the time of recording this, there was 1 copy of the book left for 169 Rand. Those 3 links are in the episode description. So there is my short and sweet first book review done. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't like about this, what information you would like more of, what we can do without. Let me know, in short, what you think.